To go deeper into our episodes, please visit the show notes in your podcast app. Or, to get a fuller, unedited experience, go find this episode on spotlightonpodcast.com. There, the notes are packed with links to resources that give you more about the people and topics explored here. Hello, and welcome to Spotlight On, the companion podcast of thetonearm.com. Here we talk with the musicians, writers, and innovators shaping media, art, and culture. I'm your host, Lawrence Purrier. Today the spotlight shines on clarinetist and composer Kinan Azmeh. Earlier this year, Kinan released live in Berlin his 14th album with his CityBand quartet. The album captures music he wrote during Syria's 2011 uprising, pieces that carry the weight of watching your homeland torn apart from thousands of miles away. Born in Damascus and now based in Brooklyn, Kinan spent decades crossing the world with his clarinet, performing with Yo-Yo Ma's Silk Road Ensemble, the New York Philharmonic, and countless others. What makes this release particularly powerful is its timing. As Syrians celebrate newfound freedom after years of struggle, Kinan's music, born from grief and anger, now carries notes of hope. We spoke about these deeply personal compositions and how his 20-year collaboration with CityBand has evolved into music encompassing classical, jazz, and Arabic music. A technical note, Kinan joined me from Beirut, Lebanon, and while I could not tell at the time, I later discovered that her internet connection was not always stable. There's some dropouts and garbles in this episode that we have done our best to clean up, but even with those, we thought this conversation was worth bringing to you. I know you'll agree. And now, Kinan Azmeh. I found and was reading through your doctoral dissertation, and I'm very curious about the relationship between your research and how your academic life informs your compositions, what you learned that you are able to apply in the artistic part of your life.
It's a wonderful question because like my whole academic life, starting when I was a little kid, playing clarinet and then all started to compose. I think I felt in a pool. I was surrounded by a group of friends, also mentors, who I think believe that the whole world is their playground in a way. I have been always surrounded by people who enjoy the varied cultural life. And so, as a student who played the clarinet in a city like Damascus, a city that is not necessarily famous for Western classical music, but that's what I studied. And so I think by default, having that as the backbone of my immediately to okay, what's out there? Where is the clarinet? Where can I find the clarinet? And of course, the clarinet is found in a variety of musical styles: jazz, Balkan music, Turkish traditional music, of course, Western classical repertoire. But I continue to have interest in contemporary music that is coming from Syria, specifically where I'm from. So moving fast forward, I was touring, playing my own music, but also I commissioned lots of composers to write music for me. And when I wanted to do my doctorate, this is the end of I'm jumping towards the end of my academic life, at least as a student. I wanted to focus on what I have been focusing on as a performer throughout my life. I wanted to do something that did not stop me from touring and being the touring musician that I am, both as a performer and as a composer. So when I was doing my research was about Arabic identity and Arabic music vocabularies and clarinet works by Syrian composers. That's what I wrote about. And it was a wonderful way for me to also juxtapose my own works against the works of other composers who are from Syria, who are also like me, who have been exposed to a variety of musical styles. So the question is, which one came first? It's impossible for me to know, because it's not that I studied these musical elements in a real way. All of these things happen in parallel. All my educational life was happening in parallel. There's the parallel of the composer and the performer, and also the parallels of traditions. Studying Mozart, Bach, Brahms, and Beethoven, while being surrounded on a day-to-day basis to music, ancient Syriac music, Armenian music, Kurdish music, and Arabic music. That's what you hear in the streets of Damascus. It's impossible to tell. I think I'm so close to my own works also to realize which part is coming from where. The only way I can describe it in a meaningful way is the music that I'm doing now, whether I'm writing for like a jazz quartet or if I'm writing for like a symphony or orchestra, has always been music that I like to hear. Like I write what I like to hear, and I happen to like lots of things. And I think I happen to also to have a certain degree of closeness and proximity to many musical traditions because I grew up in a household that valued culture very, very much, and the diverse culture that is.
What was it that was intriguing to you or maybe important to you about continuing your education? And I'm curious if pursuing an academic path for as far as you did you find that there were sacrifices you had to make with your music in order to pursue your education?
Again, it's a wonderful question. I think when I was doing it, because for example, when I went to university, did the lunacy music at the Higher Institute of Music in Damascus, but also electrical engineering at the Faculty of Electrical Engineering at the University of Damascus. And when I was I was simply thinking, I want to learn everything. I just wanted to do everything. And I think I continue to have this kind of attitude about life. I want to try everything. I want to be, to try to expand my set of tools to the maximum. Sometimes now when I'm playing, for example, actually, I wonder, had I spent more time just simply practicing rather than being obsessed with physics and cinema and politics and sports, maybe I would have been a much more technically advanced player. It's very possible, when you talk about the sacrifices. But I love the idea. I mean, music, as important as it is for me, it's not the only thing that makes life exciting for me. And music is the way through which I interact with the world and through which I can understand the world and I understand myself the best. But I can say the same about nature, and I can say the same about science, and I can say the same when I go and play like soccer with friends. All these acts are incredibly important. So when we use the word sacrifice, I think the more things you do and the more round, like of a background you develop around yourself, of course, I'm justifying it because that's the path that I chose. I think the more in touch you are with life at large. I personally don't understand when people go by just like it's this single lane. People who just spend all their lives in a practice room, while sometimes they forget, why are we in this practice room? Like, what am I trying to share? What am I trying to experience? I think life has more to offer than just a single pathway that some people choose. So I don't think of it as sacrifice. I think of it, all of it, as accumulating incredible lessons about life. Is one aspect of it, and it's not the final destination for me.
It's not dissimilar from a lot of other creative fields where, I think about writers in particular, encouraged to go out into the world and live so that you have material to bring to your work. And that's very much how I'm hearing what you say there is you interact with other fields, other topics, other life experiences, and that just enriches what you're able to create.
Yeah, because music is an incredibly abstract art form. It might be one of the most abstract art forms. And we do it and it brings us pleasure. It moves us fundamentally when we experience that physical phenomena. But I have to be always like, if you put me on a rainy day, and I love rain, like by the coast, I'm also fundamentally moved. And that's why for me, just like all of us, I think humans have to expand of how we are receiving the world. And it cannot be one way. I think people who choose just one way are missing a lot about life. And I mean, of course, what you said is also true. Music doesn't stand by itself. It's either in reaction to the world we live in, or it's an attempt by the artist to recreate the world in an ideal way according to him or her, or it might be just a tool to communicate. And in all of these scenarios, you have to be able to interact with the world itself. So you'll have something to share, something to say in the music you're creating.
There's a quote of yours I would love to talk about a little bit, and that is you said there's absolutely no difference in technique or performance between Eastern folk inspired music and music from the Western classical tradition, and that the difference is simply in how you hear the music. I love the notion there on a lot of levels. One, because there's a universalist message in that, which I think is so important, but also the notion of our ears and being ready for certain musics at different times in our development. I talk a lot with improvising artists about our early experiences with certain music and about how we couldn't hear it. My example was always, people who have listened to this podcast have heard me say this. The first time I heard John Coltrane, the album I was given was Africa Brass, and I was a teenager. And as a 15-year-old, I found it pretty impenetrable.
Right.
And now it's it's some of the my favorite music. But this idea that as we encounter the musics of other cultures, especially music that we weren't conditioned on or prepared for, we have to learn how to hear it. I would love for you to reflect on that statement that you made to me, that I quoted here, because I think there's a lot in there. I wonder if you could talk about the universalist element inherent in that, as well as the developmental element.
Absolutely. I mean, like I said, as somebody who grew up in a multitude of traditions, encouraged by my parents to embrace what the world has to offer, I used Western classical music as a main path because it was systemized in a way that gave me access to it, and also it was available in Damascus. And my dad loved classical music, my mom loved Arabic music, so I grew up listening to both kind of musics at home. So for me, learning a musical vocabulary, the vocabulary itself was not the end goal. It was simply vocabulary. And I think if you think of all the differences between all kinds of music, I understand there's some kind of a geographical specification. Yeah, this music is maybe more prominent here, this music is maybe more prominent there. But at the heart and at the core of it, it's simply about an artist, a human, trying to overcome the challenges of physical object, which is this, including that person's voice, if that person is a singer, in order to express an idea. For me, every music is about that. The idea is the most important. And of course, you need to have the tools, such as the clarinet in my case, and the skill to express an idea. And I mean, language. I think the more languages you speak, you're able to articulate your ideas in a better way. More cultural references you have, be able to tap into all of these different references at any given moment. I think it gives you a better ground for an argument. Let's put it this way. And so for me, not only music, actually, I would go even beyond that. I would think every artistic expression, including music, is about that. Is about you learn as much vocabulary as you can, but all of it has to serve where you want to create the world. And the idea for me continues to be the most important. And I think that's how universal I think of art making at large. But to understand somebody who's trying to explain to you something, the idea that another artist is trying to explain to you, you have to spend some time with that idea, especially in abstract music, and to be able to appreciate, I don't know, a Beethoven symphony for example, or like a John Coltrane solo saxophone. You have to spend time with this music, because only when you spend time with it, understand the novelty of it, and also you start to happen, but it continues to surprise you. So I think for me, music that has an idea and it has a strong character behind it, that mixes the familiar with the innovation, is music that continues to talk to me. And I think that's a universal idea also.
The album that brought us together to talk is your newest release, Live in Berlin. My understanding is that the music featured here has been a long time coming in terms of being released. The compositions date back to the earliest days of the Syrian uprising. I'm curious if you could tell me a little bit about not only the evolution of the pieces, but the evolution of sort of your relationship to that work, right? Like that's a substantial body of time, and a lot happens in a life, a lot happens in the world, a lot happens to the people that you were thinking of when you created this music. And I'm so curious about the journey you took with that music over the last almost decade and a half.
Some of the music, I think maybe one track on that album was written before 2011, before the Syrian uprising began. All the other works were written, somewhere between 2012, 2018 or 19. But when the context changes, and I played these pieces around the world, never played these pieces in Damascus, where I'm from, or in Syria at large, where I'm from, not yet. And sharing all these pieces over the last 14 years, as they've been added to the repertoire, has always been meaningful because I was trying to keep the story of home alive, especially pieces that have direct geographical connection. There are two pieces on the album, Jisreen and Dara, track number 3 and track number 4. Jisreen is this little village, for example, outside of Damascus, where growing up, every weekend, my grandparents will invite the whole family to go and work in the land. Of course, the cousins to play around, but also to work with the soil. And I always like to say the soil and the soul of the place. And it is the place where I developed my most meaningful sense of home, really.
Wow.
And that village, Jisreen, for example, was largely devastated. It witnessed one of the chemical attacks, for example, and the whole village has been destroyed. And for me, taking that piece and playing it around the world was very therapeutic for me. That sense that I'm trying to keep the name of that village alive, but also I want to contribute to what was happening at home. I didn't want to become the expatriate in a way, even though I know like this music would not change the situation on the ground. But it was meaningful for me, even when I knew 100% that nobody in the audience knows where Jisreen was. And the other one that I'm talking about, in this part of our conversation is Dara, which is the only non-original melody in the album. And that's a melody that millions of Syrians used to sing during the early years of this. So it's good to keep in mind that at some point in the Syrian uprising in 2011, 2012, millions of Syrians were singing that melody in the streets. And it took me a while to be able to reflect on that melody and to put it in a beautiful context, but for me, it was just, I wanted to keep their voices alive as well. And it's not only commemorating the moment, but for me, it was very inspiring to hear millions of people singing that melody. And now when the context changed, the dictator fled the country, to play this music again has a total different meaning. So living with some of these pieces, while the context changes, I'm reminded that maybe most artworks actually go through this kind of change of context. If you look at all the music that have survived decades and in some cases millennia, the context is bound to change. But for me, this change happened in a relatively short time. Music that was inspired, I would like to say inspired in spite of the dictatorship. And actually, about that, it gives me tremendous pleasure when I announce this piece in live in concert, and when I say that the dictator is gone and the melody survived. It just gives me an incredible moment of happiness when I say that.
Yeah, that's powerful. When you tell me about the period of time over which you wrote these compositions, roughly 2011 to 2018, it strikes me as you're in dialogue with the situation, or you're perhaps a documentarian in a way of the situation. I'm
Right.
curious, how deep can those analogies go? Is this, on the one hand, an artist processing as witness, or is there a documentary element to it? I'm very curious about you're ingesting this situation. What are you doing musically?
You know what? The thing is, in my work, this album, yes, there are these pieces written between 2011, 2018, but during that same period, I wrote maybe 20 or 25 other works. And I noticed actually that the first few years of the Syrian uprising, lots of my music was about that, about what's going on, how do I contribute to the situation in any way. But then I also noticed that maybe around 2016 or 17, it came to me again that making art should continue to be an act of freedom. And this freedom also includes not being held hostage by the tragedy. Like the fact that your country or your people or any people in the world are going through the dark side, that has been the case forever in humanity. And I wanted also to try to practice, can I free myself just for a second from that and write a piece about, I don't know, just a beautiful flower that I saw like in the street, you know? Do I have that luxury or not? Like, for example, 2018, I wrote a clarinet concerto for myself with the Seattle Symphony. And the title, I didn't choose anything from home. It was just simply clarinet concerto because I wanted that space of freedom to play with. So I think the documentary aspect, of course, exists. All of us witness the things, and when it's about owning our narrative, it's it's like anything you produce actually is part of the larger document. If you see what Syria produced artistically in the last 15 years, actually it's inspiring. Some pieces or some films or some theater pieces are about the situation, about the dictator, about the prisons, about the atrocities, but also there were like love stories that came out of films that discuss basic human condition stories, such as falling in love. And for me, these stories should also be included in the document that we're leaving behind. So it's not only documenting the tragedy, but documenting how life includes tragedy, I think. So yes, some of these pieces are part of the large document, but I wouldn't put them as the document. Not even for me to really understand what did I do musically over the last 15 years. This album is maybe 30% of what I created. And like I said earlier, it was, I will be in it, then I will step out of it. I'll be in it, and I'll step out of it.
I understand. Before we move on, I wanted to ask, if you don't mind, I wanted to ask about a couple of the pieces in particular on the record. As I was listening through the album over the last week or so, there are many striking elements to it. One is not necessarily related to the music, but the engineering is beautiful. The record sounds so good. There's a separation and a depth to it that I'm attracted to, especially in a live recording. It sounds very alive.
Thank you.
Yeah, I love that element of it. But something in particular is I feel the journey on the album. You know, there's a lot of delicate moments earlier in the record, but I have to say I was completely captivated by the two epic pieces that close out the album, Galileo Galilei and The Wedding. I'm a sucker for those big, sort of momentous, powerful, suite-like compositions. And I'm wondering if you might tell me a little bit about those two tracks. Is there a narrative that goes with either or both of them? I'm very curious because they seem to be saying something.
I mean, Galileo is a piece that was composed. This is the only track that is composed by Kyle Sana, the guitarist in the quartet.
Oh, fascinating.
Yeah, and he brought it to me, and I loved it. And there's like a middle section, which is for me one of my favorite parts actually of the whole album. It just goes totally out, and I absolutely, like, every time this piece comes in the program, like I'm waiting for it to. It's my space to scream in a way. And I mean, the last track has been like a signature track of ours. We've just been the closer of every single concert we did. And you know what? Also, we kept actually for this recording, we kept the original order in place. This is exactly how we played the concert in Berlin. And we did 2 shows actually in Berlin during that tour. And we recorded both, but we ended up using just one concert as is.
Oh, wow.
Because at first we were very happy to be playing. This is like during COVID or just slightly after the peak of COVID. Like the audience was masked, and we were just super excited to be playing a live concert. And this is actually the first time where I told the quartet, I said, guys, let's not stop at all between pieces this time. Usually we play, I speak, and we play, I speak, we play, there are lots of talking, and I give people background to the pieces. This time we decided not to say anything. Let's continue. Of course, in the editing process, we took out some intros where we felt that they might be too long. But I think the recording we have, of course, I'm too close to it to be objective, but reflects how the excitement of us being on stage actually increases, over the course of the whole album, and that's why I think the last piece on the CD and in the concert, I think maybe it's the longest time we ever played this piece. I think it's maybe at 11 minutes or something. It's like ridiculously long.
Yeah.
The thing also, I have to tell you that we didn't think when we were playing these shows, we didn't think, let's record these to release them. Not at all. I just felt that when we got to that point, it was maybe 15 years that the band has been playing together, or a bit more. And I wanted to capture something, we're talking about documenting earlier. I just wanted to document how the quartet and I, like how we're starting now to play with the music and not only playing the music. And I just wanted to keep that as a document. And then I listened to it maybe a year later and like, oh, actually, this is not too bad. And then maybe it's a good document of how we played at a certain point. So it's like, okay. So I played it for Kyle, John, and Josh. And then we said like, yeah, sure. Let's put it out. Let's put it out also so we can move on. And I think the timing is incredible that we released the album. We decided to release an album maybe 7 or 8 months ago. And by the time it was out, the Syrian context changed. So it just felt wonderful to be like the timing. The timing is great. I have to add also to this that when I say the timing is great, I don't mean that now Syria suddenly became Switzerland and that everything is great. I'm just very happy that the dictator is gone, and I'm waiting for accountability and like justice for all of these who were wronged for decades. And I just hope that, but I think also now is time to work, all of us collectively, not only the Syrians and the world community, to build a country we all would like to see. I just want to be mindful that it's not only like where I stand now as a Syrian, like it's not only, oh yeah, it's great. No, I realize the difficulties and the tragedies also that are going on even today.
We'll be back with more Spotlight On and Kinan Azmeh right after this break.
After listening to this episode, head to thetonarm.com, our online journal covering unexpected music and culture. This week on The Tone Arm, British composer Claire Cope dives into the improvisational philosophy behind her latest album, Every Journey. Drummer Stefan Hegerat explains how Toronto's underground scene shaped his genre-defying fusion project, Steph In. Polish experimental combo Hinode Tapes unmask their third album, Ida, which features Japanese bassist Hiroki Chiba and a lot of analog tape. And bluegrass quartet Ezra go deep into their album Froggy's Demise, uniquely blending classical technique with roots music virtuosity. You'll find all this and more on The Tone Arm. And while you're there, be sure to subscribe to our email newsletter. That's thetonarm.com. The Tone Arm, putting a needle on the cultural wax.
And now, back to Spotlight On. Something else I'm very interested in is the fact that you've got a band here that's been together now for the better part of 2 decades. Seems like such a luxury. And I'm curious now how having that group, that ensemble of players, how does that make its way into your compositional approach? Are you thinking about the band members, or would that be a distraction for you? How do you go about composing now, knowing these particular people are going to be interpreting the pieces?
I always write for people, not for instruments. And Kyle, John, and Josh are no different. So basically, when I think of a musical device, or like, let's say, a musical idea or concept that I would like, again, like an idea comes, I would like to share with the world, I write down whatever I write down. But I know very well that once I bring this to the lab, as I describe it, which is these 3 wonderful musicians, I know that something unexpected can happen. We start playing pieces, and then a few ideas are created on the spot, and then they become part of the composition. So if I have to analyze all these pieces, like note for note, everybody has contributed so much to what you hear now on the album. This band and we are not only a band, we have been brothers for many years, and we shared so many stories, laughters. I always joke, like missed luggages, missed connections, sleeping on trains. We used to share rooms in hotels in the early days of the career.
Yeah.
And we just had wonderful time every single time. Again, it's what is really incredible, and I feel so lucky that we got to this point, is the fact that we can now play with the music without just playing the music. Sorry, like we just don't stop at playing the music. All the concept actually happens without any musical sheets. Everybody's playing from memory, and we can easily bring a piece out if you want in the middle of another piece. So this is the luxury of playing with people who continue to surprise you. But also, I have to tell you that lots of the music that I write for orchestras, for example, lots of it sometimes end up being tested with the band, and some pieces that I write for the band, eventually I end up finishing it with having like a full orchestral version. There's lots of overlapping between what I'm doing with the quartet in relation to the rest of what I do in a more classical composition situation. But yeah, I write for people, and I think it's the best way of writing, because what people can contribute, and you're like additionally lucky if the people you're playing for are also composers themselves. And Josh, Kyle, and John are three wonderful composers too. We have an incredibly stimulating musical conversation. And also, I have to say that spending time with these guys off stage and outside of music totally is also lots of fun. And I think that's why we have been a band for like at least 15 years. And we're not only a band, but we're also really close friends.
Tell me a little bit about then how you move through the world as a collaborator, right? You've worked with some fascinating artists in some really amazing situations. And I'm curious about how those collaborations shape and impact your musical identity, your philosophies. Yeah, I'm really curious about that.
I think the nature of my instrument as a single voiced instrument, it's the standard practice for me to collaborate. I sometimes tour as a solo artist, but I'm playing with an orchestra, so it's not exactly on my own. Collaboration, I think, is maybe the best way one can use to learn a new musical vocabulary. I started, for example, my Arabic jazz trio in Damascus in 2002. And with that, I learned so much about Arabic music. I'm learning from the quartet, from the CityBand, a lot of, jazz idioms from working with that group. One of the most incredible collaborators that I had over the years has been the wonderful Yo-Yo Ma, whom I met through the Synchron Ensemble. But also he's somebody, I worked with him up close, and he is somebody who continues wanting to learn. It's incredible that somebody at where he stands artistically, and he's still somebody with his ears and eyes and brain totally open and just receiving all the time. Yeah, I mean, for me, collaboration is not only how can you contribute to this conversation. Actually, the opposite is true. Is I would like to listen to this person. But it's a use and abuse cliche, but you learn more when you listen, more than when you speak. And and these collaborations take you elsewhere, and I don't mean elsewhere in terms of where you stand in your career, but what do you want to say? It sharpens the idea of what you want to contribute to the world, and I think it allows you to see what's important also more. Juxtaposing your ideas against somebody else's ideas, I think, sharpens both ideas. And I mean, this conversation we're having, you and I, for me, I can formulate my ideas better this way rather than just me trying to put these ideas into sentences on my own. And I think all of us are collaborators by nature. And music has a wonderful way, collaboration means something else and something very deep in music. And I also noticed that in my life, also all my collaborators have been collaborators for many, many years. I rarely do a one-off because I always think that to collaborate on a deep, like a very deep level, it also takes time, because that's the nature of the art form itself. And also the nature of human connection. To become collaborators, not only acquaintances, you need time.
Speaking of that idea of collaborators and the different forms it can take, I think of the audience as collaborators as well. And I'm curious, what, if any, differences you encounter when you perform your music in different geographies? Do audiences react differently? We talked earlier about when people grow up or are accustomed to different situations and traditions in music, they hear the music differently, or they have to learn to hear it. Do any of those elements appear as you're around the world performing?
I notice usually audience where there's more sun generally are warmer. It's just like a total generalization, obviously, but the music I do, I think, is foreign to everybody, because it's, like when I bring it to the Arab world, it's music inspired by some music from the Arab world, but it's by no means traditional. And when I play, let's say, and now this record is considered to be a jazz record, if I'm playing in a, like, for just jazz lovers, it also will sound not very familiar either. I think that gives me the luxury of, I can be myself all the time. And the way the audience receives it is totally up to them. Actually, and I love this about art making. Like you mentioned, like the audience as collaborators. Of course, the connection between, somebody who's sitting in the audience, between his brain or her brain and the senses and their ears, that's where art gets created, really. My job is to be as honest as possible doing what I'm doing, and to make the connection between my brain and the tool I'm using to express an idea as short as possible, so that nothing is wasted on additional stuff that don't contribute to the storytelling. But I'm sure, like, even within in the same concert, the two people sitting next to each other will have total different understanding of pieces and will have total different, like, emotional journey. And I welcome that, because I think, had I been wanting to impose one thought on the audience from a musical piece, I would simply just tell them how they feel, and we don't need the music. I think the music allows us to go and take separate journeys, but all of these journeys can be equally meaningful and deep.
Yeah.
I try not to worry too much about the audience. I know that I'll give it like 500% every time I'm on stage. That's what I promised myself I want to do. And I'm always hoping that this music that I'm playing might open a window into somebody's brain, or maybe move somebody. There are lots of possibilities of what this piece of music can do. When I play in Damascus, for example, I know they have expectation because they have heard me a million times since I was like a little kid. So it's a different emotional context. And I feel now the same in New York, a city that I've been living in for the last 25 years. When I play in a city where I don't know anybody, even though usually these concerts feel the most relaxed, just because I feel I don't know anybody, so I can be as experimental as I can be. I don't need to impress anyone. But usually they end up halfway in the concert. I notice that I'm trying to leave a good impression on these people because they meet me for the first time. So this is the difference I feel of how much of a stranger am I to the audience I'm playing for, and how can I change that relationship within the time frame of one concert, of switching us from total strangers to at least acquaintances by the end of the concert. Because at the end, what I do in my job is I go on stage and I share my deepest secrets with a bunch of strangers. So I'm hoping that by the end, they relate to some of the secrets that I told them over the course of the night.
No, that's incredible. That's incredible. I saw again another quote of yours was about taking kids on tour.
Mhm.
You've advised other musician parents to take your kids on tour as much as you can before they start going to school. I'm fascinated by about that in two realms. One, I'd love to hear your further thoughts on the importance of doing that. But I'm also curious about, in so much as everything that happens in life impacts the artistic impulse and the artistic output, I'm curious how parenthood more specifically has impacted you as a musician and performer.
I give so much credit to my parents who, when I was starting, music, first they decided that my sister and I should learn an instrument because they thought it will contribute to our well-being in our lives, regardless if we choose it as a profession or not. So I'm very thankful that I was lucky to have such parents. And also they had to endure a few years of me trying to make a decent sound on the instrument. They went through a lot. So until I managed to be at a decent level, especially given the geographical context, it wasn't common to have an instrumentalist in Syria as, oh, that's your full-time job. Everybody had to do something else in addition to being an artist. And my parents supported me throughout my journey. So this whole connection between you and the parents, like the intergenerational connection for me is very important because it impacted me deeply. And now that I think of my son, I have a son who's 4 years old, and my wife is also a violinist and a composer. He sees us do an activity it's very abstract. Like we hold an instrument and we produce sounds on an instrument, right? In a time where everything is valued according to the financial contribution to the world economy, music is not something that you think would be at the top of the list. So we're doing something that is very, very personal, and we love doing that. And this passion is what I want my son to have. And the only way he can actually understand this passion is by seeing it. We can talk to him about how great mountain climbing is. You can tell him incredible stories about world traveling. He's not going to understand any of it unless he does it. And he should do it with people who are very passionate about it. And both my wife and I are very passionate about what we do. So it's only natural that we introduce our kids to the things we like, I mean, not even, these are things that we adore and we love, and that's how we live our life. So I don't think I'm, the statement of what I said, yeah, you have to take your kids on tour with you. I don't think this should come as a surprise because it's wonderful. For me, it's some of the most inspiring moments when I'm like doing a sound check and I see my son running around like the theater. And also, actually, I have to tell you that also my connection with the audience changed after I have my son. I used to be totally bothered if I hear like a kid scream in the middle of a slow and soft piece. Now, actually, I welcome it. I love it now. I cannot wait until it happens. It just reminds me that, this is also an audience and kids do appreciate music and they are fascinated by it. We have to give them a chance to really listen to music on this kind of scale. It doesn't have to be only Wheels on the Bus. I think kids who are 3 can equally be fascinated by like a Brahms symphony, but the adults around them should give them a chance to try and sit through. And it just also, having a kid and also doing all of this touring with him just puts work in the right spot, Like playing music is what I love to do, but also I love spending time with my kid. So sometimes the connection between the two, like I finish playing and then I have to run to change his diaper. This is when he was like 2 years old, or, the switch between real life and stage life becomes even smaller. And I love that.
Thank you so much, Kinan Azmeh, and as always, thank you for listening to Spotlight On. Spotlight On is executive produced and hosted by me, Lawrence Purrier. We're produced and marketed by Michael Donaldson. Editing and sound design is by Terry Grant. Our theme music is by Q Burn's Abstract Message. Thank you so much for supporting our work. Please rate and review us wherever you listen to podcasts, and then visit us online at spotlightonpodcast.com. While you're there, explore the free episode archive. And for more interviews and writings from me and a diverse array of contributors, check out thetonearm.com. Thanks for listening, be safe, and stay in touch.